Good evening, everyone. 3 days ago, I had my first day off in January. Well, it was supposed to be a day off. I took my lovely wife out for a meal. We'd made a decision. We've just adopted 2 little kittens, and it's like having babies all over again, I'm sure you can imagine. Quite little characters. And we decided that we were going to take some time off, go for a nice meal, visit another town, another city. We had a wonderful, wonderful day. We came back some 3 or 4, 5 hours later, and I was sat there relaxing because it's my 1 day off in the month so far. And Taj told me of a WhatsApp message or a messenger, Facebook Messenger broadcast message that had been sent. And it transpired that it was from a friend of ours whose 20-year-old son goes to exactly the same university as our son, who is also 20 years old, who was out drinking on a Friday night, much the same as many university student does, despite the fact that we as parents say don't stop out too late and focus on your studies. And something happened in the early hours of that Saturday morning. Something happened with some other youths that led to maybe 1 or 2 punches. And as a result of those 1 or 2 punches, within a few hours, he was pronounced dead. Now, this was a 20-year-old boy who, when I've spoken to his mum, I've speaking to her every single day. When she describes him, she could be describing our son. She said he loved football, he loved going to the gym with his mates, he had dreams and aspirations to become a sports physiotherapist. Ours wants to become an accountant. Why ever? I have no idea. And his biggest passion is PlayStation 4. When our son comes home, we can practically lose him in the house because he occupies the lounge, his lounge, by the way, and takes over it and locks the door, and he's playing PlayStation all day long. Then he comes out, sometimes in the evening, looking exhausted, telling us, as if he's been to work, right? How are you, son? Oh, it's tough. Really? Such is the life of a 20-year-old. But that's where the life of this 20-year-old stopped. What I want to talk to you today about is community, values, resilience, dreams, aspirations. Because at some level, every single one of us in this room will have each one of those. Whether we are aware of what our values are, whether we have had the opportunity to deliver and test our resilience, whether we even dare to dream and have the aspirations to be something that we never thought we could be. Whether we understand that we are a part of a community. I'll bet you there are people in this audience now that have never even spoken to their neighbours. Do we even understand the communities that we live in? You see, UPF is a community. By any other definition, it's a community. And the definition of a community for me is a group of people that get together under the umbrella of shared values. More often than not in society, we forget our values. What Daphne hasn't mentioned is that I do an awful lot of leadership work. I work with the very highest leaders in most organizations. I can walk into an organization, and one of the first questions I say to these people as I'm doing coaching with them, or I'm training them, or I'm leading them, is, what are your values? And inevitably what they all say, they'll look at a poster on the wall and they'll say, those are my values: honesty, respect, integrity, diversity. And they will basically spout off the values of their organization, and I will say that's a lie. Those aren't your values. You weren't born with those values. Your values are very personal to you. The key really with values is to see whether you're aligned to the organizational values. They are good values, but they don't define who you are. See, more often than not, we end up being hypnotized in life, and we walk through life thinking that we're making free choice, but in actual fact what we're doing is we're being led by the conditioning that society puts upon us. We are constantly being teased in society by all sorts of conditions coming through the mass media, coming through our families, coming from our schools, coming from our workplaces, coming from our friends. It took me a long time to understand this. But I had dreams from a very, very early childhood. From the age of 10, I dreamt of nothing else but to be a police officer. My dad was a typical Asian guy. And his aspirations, his dreams of me, as well as my brothers and sisters, were to become a doctor, a solicitor, or a lawyer. My dad was that guy from East is East. But you see, I was silently sitting there. I was one of 7. We lived in a 2.5 bedroom terraced house, and I was one of 7, and I used to be shaking my head inside vigorously because that's not who I wanted to be. That's not how I identified with myself, and that's not how I chose to be identified. I wanted to be somebody who protected society, who stood up for authority, who took responsibility for the safety of others. I used to go to the bottom of our street and watch the big, tall police officers walking people towards the football stadium down at the bottom of our road. I used to look at their tunics and I used to think, my goodness, don't they ever say that if ever you want the time, you go and ask a policeman? If ever you're threatened, you go and speak to a policeman? You see, my dad had a vision of policing from his days back in India. And back in India, at that time, the policing was seen to be corrupt. And therefore, police officers didn't have the respect that they have and they accord in this country. But my dad is also a visionary because once he understood my passion, he bought into that passion and helped me make my dream come true. And this is where I come on to resilience. From the point of resilience, from passion comes resilience. And from the point of resilience, you can overcome any challenges that come your way. Life will throw so many challenges in your way. It is a fact of life. It is a sad inevitability of living the longer that you live. Challenges will come around every single corner. Let's not be blinded by them. I don't want to live in some happy, clappy world where we think that everything is all roses, because it's not. We only have to look around the corner to see somebody else suffering. But this is where community comes in as well. Community for me is those people who have those shared values, but being awakened to the values of that community. And then to live their lives in accordance with that community. When I got that message on the Sunday night about the 20-year-old boy, I made a commitment that whilst ever I might not know this family very well, what happened to that family was wrong. Fundamentally, tragically wrong. And somebody has to step up and do something. Now, I could have been that angry voice in the crowd that shouts for imprisonment, that shouts for justice, that shouts for this or that, or blame the police, or blame the council, or blame the pop bars and the clubs and the cities. That's not the way to go. Because anger doesn't resolve anything in my experience. And trust me, I've seen plenty of anger. I have lost count of the amount of dead bodies I've seen in my life. I've actually literally lost count of how many post-mortems I've attended as a senior investigating officer. I thought the way to do this is to send a community message out. So I got onto my Facebook Live, and I did a Facebook Live saying to the community, putting a challenge out to the community that if you have values, then you will do whatever it takes to get the information to the police to support the police. The police don't have the responsibility to keep us safe. Everybody has a responsibility to keep ourselves safe, to make our society safe. This morning, I was due to go to other meetings, but this morning I had East Midlands TV turn up on my doorstep at our house. Straight after that, I had a radio interview. Straight after that, I had another radio interview. Just by putting Facebook Lives out, which, by the way, reached 20,000 people in the matter of 2 days. To be honest, I just wish my own Facebook Lives would reach that sort of number. But what it proved to me is this. It proved to me that deep within every single one of us, there is love. Deep within every single one of us, there is a desire for peace and harmony. Deep down within every single individual within this room and the community around this room and in the streets beyond this room, there is an absolute desire for serenity and harmony. And it's taken me a long, long time to find that, to understand that. And that is now what I do. When I talk to leaders and I do leadership training, I don't talk about leadership models. I talk about them looking within themselves to understand that being a leader is actually being a servant. The more you serve as a leader, the better leader you become. The more cups of tea that you make for your staff, the more human you become. That is what I've learned about leadership, that it is about service. And I work with some of the highest leaders that you can imagine in organizations. Abraham Maslow's, if you've ever heard of him, had the hierarchy of the 5 basic human needs. And he talks about the physical needs, and he talks about the psychological needs. And at the very top, he talks about the spiritual need, the need for self-actualization. Ladies and gentlemen, when you get to a certain point in time in your life, self-actualization kicks in. And I believe, and I'm honored, and I'm humbled to be living in my self-actualization, to change society, to change the world, to impact on as many millions of people as I can with the work that I do and the work that I'm doing with Stephen right now. This is what it's about for me. And in order for me to do that, that doesn't require any ego. It doesn't require any celebritism. It doesn't require any media. It requires pure and utter hard work, resilience, and aspirations. The belief that a dream can come true if you put the work in. You see, we live in a society right now of instant gratification. Unfortunately, that's how we think. Social media has created this Instagram lifestyle where we think that we can become millionaires overnight. We think that we can lose weight in days. We think that we can get 6-pack abs in a matter of weeks. I've tried it, it doesn't work. I've taken that secret pill, I've ordered it through Amazon, it doesn't work. I love old phrases. I love old phrases. And there's an old phrase I know that every single one of the wonderful people in this room will know. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no substitute for hard work. Literally no substitute. I feel very honored, very blessed, very humbled that in the 3 years that I've been working on my business that I've got to where I've got to now. But what people don't see beyond the tip of my iceberg are the relentless hours that I pour in, is the sleepless nights that I have, are the dreams that I constantly have for my clients, for my work, for my community. Is the heart breaking every time I see some young person dying. Despite the fact that I've seen death so many times, I said to the news reporter today, it doesn't get any easier. Doesn't get any easier. That 20-year-old boy could have been my stepson. That 20-year-old boy could also have been the son of any single person in our street, in your city. This has to stop. And this will only stop when the silent majority that is the community wake up, understand their values, and start doing something with those values. They start coalescing and speaking with a sound voice to say, no, no more. But we do it from a position of love, not from a position of anger. I used to think that anger was the opposite of love. I now realize that anger is not the opposite of love. It's a byproduct of the opposite of love. Do you know what the opposite of love is? Indifference? Hate? Ignore? Do you know the true opposite of love is fear? Think about every tragedy that's ever been experienced in this world, even down to Hitler. The actions that they carried out was because they were fearful that somebody else will do better or somebody else will go beyond them. Intolerance, and trust me, I've seen plenty of intolerance in my life. When I joined the police service back in 1983, I was a brown speck in a sea of white. You could have spotted me from miles away. I saw so much intolerance. I have had physical threats. I have had hate mail. I have had things in my locker. I've been there, done it, got the t-shirt. But I have zero anger towards it because I understood that every single person who ever did anything like that came from a position of fear. They did not understand. They were ignorant to the fact. So when we become intolerant towards each other to the point of violence, it is merely because we do not understand. So therefore, our job as a community is to help people to understand. And it's great that the work that the UPF are doing is geared towards that, and so many other organizations. And I aim to be at the spearhead of this change. Thank you so much.